right, welcome to another beautiful evening out in Windora Nature Nutters. We are with the gang this evening from JCU. Now, Rishabh here is a brilliant young scientist and he is out here chasing geckos because he is doing a study. Now, I'll allow him to explain that further.
Thanks, Dougal, and it's great to have you guys around, and it's always good to have a bit of company out here in the middle of nowhere. So I'm doing my PhD studying the functional morphology of gecko toe pads, and we're doing this in an Australian native gecko radiation called the diplodactylids. So the diplodactylids have relatively high species diversity in Queensland, and this group they occupy a whole range of different habitats. So some of them are terrestrial, some of them live in the spinifex and other shrubs, and just trees and rocks. So what I'm studying is how their toe pads have evolved to allow them to stick to these different surfaces. So a gecko's toe pad is made up of millions of tiny little hairs, and each of these hairs is sort of roughly 1/10 the diameter of a human hair. So when you look at an entire limb, that's millions, or in some cases even billions, of these tiny hairs. So when we want to understand how the morphology, which is essentially the length, the shape and the density of these hairs, have allowed these animals to stick to different environments, we do it in 3 steps. So the first step to that is, on a night like this, we'll go out, and Dougal and Mariella have been joining us on this. We find an animal, get information on where it lives, what the orientation was, and how rough the surface was. And we measure surface roughness using a surface profile gauge. So this is something that engineers and pipe fitters use to see how smooth or rough a polish or coat is. And so we've incorporated that into our study, and we measure how rough tree bark or rocks or dead logs, like logs and stuff, are. The next step to this is understanding how animals perform on these surfaces. So my advisor and I, we've come up with a roughness profile of a range of animal environments across Queensland. So we measure the roughness of different tree genera, different types of rocks, and we use sandpaper as a proxy, and then see how sticky animals are on this. And that's done using a little transducer which was originally used in robotic arms. So that's the second step, and then the last step is looking at the toe pads themselves at high magnification using a scanning electron microscope.
I must say the images you showed us of those were just fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing.
To see the density of those.
It's like another world in there. No, thanks for joining us, guys. It's you guys have been awesome.
Now, just to clarify for those who may not understand morphology, the word, that's the understanding of the various parts and the names given to those various parts.
Yep, exactly.
So
and to put that into perspective, so our morphology is we have somewhat longer limbs and relatively shorter arms to that. And then we have different head sizes. I'm a big wolf head, but Dougal's more symmetric. Morphology is the study of sort of parts and form, the form in form and function. So.
Now, my next question would be, how did a man from Mumbai, as you are, come to Australia and end up at JCU studying gecko toe pads?
Long story. So it's crazy. Growing up in a city with 1 million people, it was just amazing for me that growing up there, that wildlife actually survives in areas of high population densities. So we think of wildlife being in areas that are really pristine, but that's not the case. So nature
like we've
always
seen with the Tokai geckos in Indonesia, various snakes going through urbanized areas, hunting rats and things like that.
Exactly. So I have very fond memories as a kid, just looking out of the balcony from my grandparents' house and seeing about 20 odd species of birds, different snakes, and not very many geckos, but mostly snakes, a lot of birds, a couple of mammals like mongooses and stuff. So that got my interest.
So you had a childhood interest in
and
from there, I'm assuming.
It just the curiosity started there. I was also really fortunate to grow up 10 minutes away from the national park. So Bombay has a national park in the heart of the city, and it's only about 100 square kilometers. But I believe, and I might be wrong on this, but it has one of the highest densities of leopards in the world.
Brilliant.
So and not just
Brother Nature to visit.
and just not leopards. It's just overall biodiversity there is insane. The bird diversity, the butterflies, and obviously the herbs, crazy. So
Sounds like we shared common interest there, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in an area like this.
And it's crazy that stuff you pick up as a kid, then one thing led to another, and I've done a few different jobs in environmental education and a few different science jobs, and then ended up here wanting to do research. So
another thing I was wanting to ask you, and we'll obviously do that throughout the evening, but whilst we go hunting and searching for things and you're conducting those tests, I'll get you to perhaps explain some of the utensils and tools.
For sure,
for
sure.
Have a bit of a geek out on some of the cool equipment you get to use.
For sure. So it'd be amazing, and we can show everyone what we're up to. Hopefully we find some cool stuff tonight.
Brilliant. Cool. Let's go.
Let's go. Woo-hoo.
So by marking a waypoint for where we found the strophe. Then I'm going to take a temperature measurement just of the substrate that he's on. So Keki, that's 24 degrees.
Yeah. Do you mind holding on to the geck while I take the roughness?
I can certainly do that for you.
Oh, thanks for that.
Alright, little man, come with me. You're in safe hands.
So I'm just taking the roughness with this roughness gauge of the substrate that he's on. Are you ready?
Yep.
308.
Yep.
521.
Yep.
190.
Yep.
484.
Yep.
395.
So you guys obviously take half a dozen readings and you get the average of
Yes.
means between those.
So for the roughness, 5 readings. And we need the diameter as well. You have the tape?
Yeah. So the reason why we get 5 different measures of roughness is because on that micron scale, the gauge measures roughness on the micron scale, and things in nature are the roughness of things in nature on that scale is really, really variable. So we sort of try and capture that variation in roughness. So far what we sort of tend to find is some trees and rocks are equally rough, whereas some trees specifically are quite smooth. So this looks like it might be on the smoother end of the spectrum.
Now, are you finding a correlation between, say, a particularly smooth rock or a particularly smooth tree to a species that is highly adapted to gripping that particularly smooth surface?
A couple of years ago, we put out a paper looking at 3 different species of velvet geckos. So that was Odura cograi, cassanaui, and Odura monilis. And we found that they actually their clinging ability correlated with their habitat choice. So they choose to live where they can stick better, which then correlated with surface roughness.
That's brilliant. Fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm just gonna take the diameter of this. It's really tiny. 4.
Sorry, this one's getting away on me. He's a little jumpy.
Give us a look.
Beautiful. Look at that. It's going to be hard in the wide angle, nature nutters, but an absolutely stunning eye with brilliant eyebrows, beautiful spines up the tail. Just a all-round beautiful gecko.
Sorry, I kept looking at this.
Now, Matt, you study chat deer.
Yep.
Or chet deer.
Chital deer.
Yeah, chital deer, thank you. You're obviously volunteering on this program.
Yep.
Do you have a love of herps as well?
I tell you what, the love of herbs has definitely been developing over the last 9 days or so. So I hadn't done much spot biting or anything like that before coming out, and It's a different world being at night. So a lot of my work with chital deer, we see them run around during the day and then collect some of the camera trap images, which gives us a better idea of where they are overnight. But then you have the opposite side of the coin here, where you're coming out at night and finding these things. So definitely becoming a bit of a herper for
Cool.
sure.
Well, good on you for volunteering. That's fantastic. All right, Nature Nutters, I actually finally get to contribute to this survey. We've got another beautiful little Strophoreus siciliaris, this beautiful northern spiny-tailed gecko. Now, the guys are about to start taking the data entry on this particular specimen found on this tree here. Now, Kip, can you just, if you wouldn't mind, just explain the use of the data entry?
Yeah, so we're collecting everything from what time the gecko was spotted, on what kind of substrate, so for example tree or shrub, then the species of the tree or shrub, and then we give it an ID which goes into the GPS, so you mark the point, the location where the gecko was found, and the orientation, whether it was facing up or down, horizontal or vertical, then the temperature of the substrate, then what kind of branching and trunk complexity and the bark type of the substrate, and the diameter and the roughness of the substrate.
It's a lot of information to take.
Yeah.
It's very thorough.
Yeah.
Now, you're studying a PhD in various cetaceans, in dolphins and whales and things,
so-
or one in particular?
Yeah, just one dolphin, which is called the humpbacked dolphin. It's a very coastal species of dolphin, kind of sharing the habitat with a lot of fishing activity. So what I'm trying to find out is how the dolphins forage in relation with the different kinds of small-scale fisheries in India, and how those two species, humans and dolphins, interact with each other, because there's a lot of bycatch and depredation. I don't know if you've heard of that word, but what it means is when animals kind of forage from the fishing gear to find easy prey. So that's what depredation means, and because of which a lot of these dolphins get caught in the net, and they're at a lot of risk of getting entangled and possibly dying.
Something we see down south with our migratory shorebirds, the
Yes, and even
petrels
sharks
and
for that
sharks
matter.
and all
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
that's right.
yeah. So I'm just trying to find out at what sort of magnitude that's happening and how it's affecting both the animals and the humans, in this case fishermen, in terms of the economics of it all, and how it's affecting the foraging behavior of the dolphins.
Well, thank you for your contribution in science, and
Thank
good
you.
luck with that study. I
Thanks so much.
certainly hope you succeed in your doctorate. That's fantastic. All right, Nature Nutters, I am so very excited, and I owe this fine man a beer because he has just caught the smooth knobtail gecko, and a species I've wanted for the last couple of days. Excuse me. Oh, look at that. What an absolutely gorgeous little gecko. Everyone familiar with the channel knows how much I love this genus, this group of geckos. I am very, very excited. We'll obviously get some stills and show you the spectacular beauty of this particular animal. Alright, now we've actually been discussing something, and that is that Mariella and I have a tendency, and we're speculating, and we'd love your opinion out there on the internet as well, but we're speculating that on the heavily moonlit night, the little prey items, the geckos, the lizards, the smaller things, the insects and things, have a tendency to bunker down and hide from their predators. We were discussing that, and you sort of feel the same way, that perhaps on these brighter evenings we're not finding as many things because the predators are out and more capable of seeing them.
Yeah, exactly. So like I said earlier, I feel like there's a balance in the middle and intermediate area where it's prime opportunity for them to come out and forage for themselves, because it's too dark, they can't see their own prey. It's too light, they're really vulnerable. Like, that's what we found, at least in my observations with deer. If it's too bright, they're vulnerable to dingoes and stuff, so they kind of bunker away. But when it's intermediate, they're out and about, and when it's really dark, they're really out and doing their thing. But as a prey item, they've got to be really careful of that.
Yeah, and we see it across the entire food web.
Yeah, and in different genuses as well, which is really cool.
And then your thoughts on temperature too?
Oh, well, temperature, like for reptiles, obviously if it's too cold, they're going to not want to come
It's
out.
a bit
They're
of an
not
obvious one being ectotherms.
yeah, exactly. They're not going to come out and do their thing.
So I've neglected to mention, Rishab and the team had come all the way out to Windora to increase the number of species and therefore the variety within the dataset. Rishab wanted to find two particular species, the first being the jewel gecko, Strophoreus elderi, as its feet and toes had specialised in gripping spinifex, the main substrate in its environment. And then secondly, he wanted to find tessellated gecko, Diplodactylus tessellatus, which had different toe morphology as it had evolved to walk over highly polished gibber stones and cracking clay soils instead. As we'd been in Windora for quite a while by that point, I shared the fact that we knew a couple of good places to find both species, therefore volunteered to take the gang out to our spots after they had unfortunately had a few nights' failed attempts to find them themselves. Unfortunately, we don't have it on film, but we thankfully, despite some very unseasonal cold weather, we managed to find several tessellateds without too much drama. However, the jewel geckos were proving to be far more sensitive to the cold snap, and after numerous long nights of failed efforts, unfortunately poor Rishab and the team had to return home with the data from only one specimen they had found during their entire time in Windora. Not that they returned home empty-handed by any means. They obviously still had plenty of data from all the spinies and several tessellateds. It's just that they fell short of the desired sample rate of the elderi, their main target species. Mariella and I were gutted when the weather suddenly turned nice and warm again the day after they had left. We almost felt guilty when we went out and started to find them, enjoying the warm sand of an early evening.
All right, guys, we got a special guest tonight, the jewel gecko, or Diplodactylus elderi. He is a special guest. We've been looking for this guy for the last few days with the guys from JCU, but we didn't have any luck, mostly because the temperature just wasn't right. So today we came out, and the first find of the night is this guy. It's tiny. So, sorry, Rishab, but...
It's elderi.
It's elderi on the move. So these guys are distributed. So for you to know, we're at the edge of the distribution, and they go all the way to Western Australia. So they're quite, I wouldn't say uncommon, but they are hard to find. So we're very privileged. So we'll show some stills, and we'll let him go.
Well, as they say, hindsight's a terrible teacher, and unfortunately we didn't get a little bit more time with Rishab and the team from JCU, as we did have an absolute blast with them, and we want to thank them for allowing us to join them in their little project. We really did have a great time. Anyway, we'll wrap this up here for another episode, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for joining us.